If you have ever felt your heart tighten simply because your child suddenly disappeared without any information at all, stay with this story. Diep and James are in absolute panic. Please press like and subscribe to the channel to find out what happens next. Mr. Hoan is away on a business trip. The house feels quieter than usual, filled only with the familiar silences of a family long accustomed to distance. Mrs. Hoan sits alone and suddenly finds herself missing Nyi's laughter, missing the way the little girl runs around the house, turning everything warmer just by being there. She calls James and Diep, asking them to let Nyi come over for a while to keep her company. No one thinks that such an ordinary day like this would become the beginning of a fear no one was prepared for. Mrs. Hoan welcomes Nyi with her familiar, gentle smile, a light hug that is still firm enough to make the child feel truly expected. From the moment she steps inside, Nyi chatters away, stories from school, the cat that just gave birth at the end of the alley, tiny things that somehow make the once quiet house noticeably warmer. Mrs. Hoan listens to everything without interrupting, only nodding and smiling, her eyes unable to hide her happiness. She has already prepared a few toys she bought the day before, nothing expensive, just small dolls and a colorful building set. Nyi happily sits on the floor, playing and laughing, occasionally turning around to show Mrs. Hoan, as if afraid that the joy might slip away too quickly. Mrs. Hoan also brings out some candy and cookies, placing them on a small plate and reminding the child to eat slowly so she won't choke. Seeing Nyi sitting there so well behaved, Mrs. Hoan feels reassured. She stands up, lightly brushing her clothes, and says in a tone that comes from pure habit, one she has used countless times before, "Sit here and play, okay? Grandma will go out back to tend to the chickens for a bit." Nyi looks up and nods right away, without the slightest hesitation. It is the nod of a child who is deeply familiar with this place, with a gentle grandmother who is always nearby. Mrs. Hoan walks out to the backyard, her heart at ease, believing that in just a few minutes she will return, and Nyi will still be there, sitting and playing quietly, just like every time before. No one, in that moment, thinks of anything bad. No one is careless. No one makes a deliberate mistake. It is simply the familiar trust of people who have lived too long with a sense of safety, so long that no one realizes how fragile that peace truly is. Mr. Hoan returned home without telling anyone in advance. The house felt strangely quiet. No conversation, no familiar footsteps from Mrs. Hoan. He set his briefcase down on a chair, glanced around once, then stopped when he saw Nyi sitting on the floor, deeply focused on fitting together colorful toy pieces. The child looked up at the sound. Her eyes were clear, without a hint of fear. "You're home, Grandpa?" Nyi said naturally, as if his appearance were the most ordinary thing in the world. Mr. Hoan smiled. He sat down beside her and asked a few simple questions: what she was playing, whether she was having fun, whether she liked the new toys. Nyi answered cheerfully, talking as she showed him the shapes she had just built. Mr. Hoan picked up a piece and tried fitting it his own way, making Nyi burst into laughter. The moment unfolded naturally, no awkwardness, no distance. Mr. Hoan suddenly realized he was smiling more than usual. There was something unfamiliar in that feeling, a gentle joy, free of pressure, free of calculation. Perhaps even he hadn't expected that a child not bound to him by blood could soften his heart this way. Nyi's innocence made him forget the exhausting business trips, the tense meetings, the heavy responsibilities that had weighed on him for so long. He patted Nyi's head, his voice lowering. Let Grandpa take you outside for a bit, okay? Ly looked up at him. She didn't ask where they were going. She didn't show any worry. She stood up right away, holding her toy as if she were simply about to step into another room. Mr. Hoan didn't call Mrs. Hien, didn't send a message. No one else knew he had come home. The door closed softly behind the two of them, so quietly it made no noticeable sound. In that house, no one witnessed the brief conversation that had just taken place, and no one knew when Ly had stepped out of the house. Mrs. Hien came back inside from the backyard in a very calm mood. Tending to the chickens had taken only a moment, and she even thought she would return in time to see what new shape Ly had finished building. As she walked, she called out casually, "Ly!" There was no reply. She looked around the living room. The spot where Ly had been sitting was now empty. The toys were still there, scattered across the floor as if abandoned halfway through play. Mrs. Hien briefly thought the child must have run into another room or gone upstairs to look for something. Children do that all the time. "Ly?" she called again, a little louder. Still no answer. She quickly stepped into the next room, opened the bedroom door, checked the bathroom, then turned back. Her steps grew faster. A faint unease brushed over her, but she tried to reassure herself. Maybe the child had run out to the front yard. She opened the door and looked outside. The front yard was empty. The road lay just as quiet as any other afternoon. "Ly!" This time her voice was higher, more urgent. No footsteps came running back. No familiar, "Yes?" in response. The silence stretched on for a few more seconds, but to Mrs. Hien it felt endless. Her heart began to race. She turned back into the house, calling Ly's name again and again, moving from room to room, opening doors she would never normally open. Her initial calm dissolved quickly. "Where is she?" she muttered, her hands trembling as she lifted a small chair aside, peering under the table as if hoping Ly might be hiding there. There was nothing. Panic surged in. Mrs. Hien stood frozen in the middle of the living room, her eyes fixed on the toys lying motionless on the floor. If Ly had run off on her own, she would have taken the toy she was playing with. But no, everything was still exactly where it had been. Mrs. Hien hurriedly grabbed her phone. Her fingers shook so badly she had to dial several times before finally reaching James's number. Her voice broke the moment the call connected. "James? Ly is gone. I can't find her." Panic spilled into every breath, every broken sentence. In the house that had only moments ago been filled with a child's laughter, there was now only a terrifying emptiness, and a fear that began to spread, with no one knowing where it would end. On the other end of the line, James and Diep were no less panicked. The moment they heard Mrs. Huen's trembling voice, broken by the words, "Ly is nowhere to be found," Diep's heart tightened as if gripped by an invisible hand. James clenched his phone, his mind going completely blank for a few seconds, before he managed to say just one sentence. "I'm coming home right now." They sped off immediately. The wind lashed against their faces, but neither of them said a word. Diep's face turned pale, her hands gripping the hem of her shirt tightly, terrifying images flashing through her mind, things she didn't dare to name. James drove with his jaw clenched, eyes locked straight ahead. In his head, one dangerous possibility after another kept surfacing, overlapping endlessly, making every meter of road feel unbearably long. When they arrived home, the sight before them made Diep's legs give out. Mrs. Huan had collapsed into a chair, sobbing like a child, calling Ly's name in desperation. Diep rushed forward and wrapped her arms around her, tears spilling uncontrollably. James froze for a single breath, then forced himself to steady down. He held his mother by the shoulders and spoke firmly, though he struggled to keep his voice calm. "Mom, please stay calm. Let me find her. No one waited for anyone. James and Diep split up again. James ran to the neighboring houses, asking urgently if anyone had seen Ly come over to play. The repeated shakes of the head made his heart sink heavier with each answer. Diep headed toward the nearby canal, calling her daughter's name, her eyes glued to every corner, terrified that even a second's delay could allow the worst to happen. They found nothing. Both of their minds spiraled into chaos. Familiar paths suddenly felt foreign. Panic spread fast, swallowing every rational thought. And in that moment, both James and Diep understood. They were facing a fear greater than anything they had ever known. James brought Diep back to his parents' house, partly to calm his mother, partly to organize the storm of thoughts raging in his own mind. By then, Mrs. Hoan could barely hold herself together. She sat motionless on the chair, hands trembling, her eyes constantly fixed on the doorway, as if Ly might appear the instant she blinked. Diep sat beside her, holding her hand, trying to speak gently, even though she herself was barely keeping it together. James paced around the house, not to search again, but to piece together the fragments of time that had just passed. He asked his mother every small detail: when she went to the backyard, when she came back inside, whether she heard any unusual sounds. Mrs. Hoan kept shaking her head, tears falling without pause. Then, James suddenly stopped in front of a wooden cabinet near the entrance. On top of it sat a small briefcase, neatly placed. James stared at the briefcase for a few seconds. A strange sensation washed over him. He turned to his mother and asked, keeping his tone as normal as he could, "Mom, is this Dad's briefcase?" Mrs. Hoan followed his gaze and froze. She stood up abruptly, stepped closer, her trembling hand reaching for the handle. "Yes. He took this briefcase with him when he went on his business trip." The words fell softly, but inside James's head, they echoed with terrifying clarity. If the briefcase was here, then Mr. Hoan had returned home. But he hadn't told anyone. No call, no message, and during that exact window of time, Ly disappeared. James stood still. Disjointed images began arranging themselves into a single picture, one he desperately didn't want to see. Mr. Hoan returned without warning. Ly was home alone. No one saw the grandfather and granddaughter leave together, and now, no one knew where the little girl was. James didn't want to believe it. He tried to push the thought out of his mind, as if refusing to name it could keep it from becoming real. But the harder he resisted, the clearer the chill running down his spine became. For the first time in his life, a single thought made him unable to stand steady. If his father had taken Ly away, then where was she now? Mrs. Hoan suddenly seemed to remember something. She hurriedly grabbed her phone, her hands shaking so badly that she dialed the wrong number several times. "The number you have dialed is currently unavailable." She tried again. It was still the same cold, emotionless voice. James called his father as well, again and again. Each time the call ended, his heart sank a little further. No ringing, no signal. As if the person on the other end of the line had vanished from the world altogether. Mrs. Hoan began to panic. Her voice broke apart. "Why can't we reach him? Why does this have to happen now?" James didn't answer. He stared at the phone screen as it slowly went dark, terrifying thoughts lining up one after another in his mind. Mr. Hoan's silence was no longer a coincidence. It had become a void that left all of them struggling to breathe. Night fell quickly, carrying with it a heavy silence that pressed down on the entire house. Mrs. Hoan sat motionless in the corner of the chair, her eyes empty, as if all her strength had been drained by fear. Diep stood by the window, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, trying to keep from collapsing. And James stood in the middle of the room, saying nothing. Yet inside his head, questions kept crashing into one another without pause. No one dared to state anything out loud, but no one could push away the thought that was slowly taking shape. The briefcase remained where it was, resting quietly on the cabinet, silent, like an unnamed piece of evidence. And that silence was more frightening than any confession could ever be. James understood that from this moment on, searching for Ly would no longer be a simple act of looking for a missing child. It would become a journey of confronting truths he had never imagined he might have to face, especially when the person under suspicion was his own father. What would James do if the truth, once revealed, had the power to tear his family apart?